Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Chris, aka Barnone11970. As always, I thank you guys for checking out my video. Alright guys, quick little video that I want to try and put in perspective for people who think the best way to have their savings work for them is the old way that we were taught in school about how to get a job, put your money into a savings account, accrue interest, and you'll be fine later in life. And I'm going to basically show you how that is not the case. This video is going to basically be for people who really don't know what's going on. So I highly recommend you watch this with somebody who may not believe in what's going on or may not even be aware of it, because there's plenty of us out there. I was one of those people as close as 2011. So before that, I had no idea what was going on. So I can understand why the majority of people would just have no clue, because politicians will never tell you this, banks will never tell you this, the media will never tell you this, and unless you have yourself associated with somebody who is familiar with this or you stumble across it yourself, you're probably never going to know. It's like being born and you get put up for adoption as an infant, and you grow up thinking the people that adopted you are your parents. You'll never search for your original parents because you didn't know about it. So that's how they can get this information going for long periods of time without people ever knowing. So knowledge is power. Keep that in mind. So when you're in school, they basically have the old expression of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but you can teach a new one. So they love to program people at an early age, because we're very naive, we're very trusting, and we're sponges waiting to absorb information. So we look at our teachers and our television shows as ways to learn things, and they take advantage of this, unfortunately. And one of the many lies that they teach us, or misinformation, whatever you want to title it as, is they try and teach you that if you put your money in a bank, you will do well in life later on. Now, first of all, we have to understand there's a difference between currency and money. What you're holding in your hand, I don't have anything near me, unfortunately, but a dollar bill, especially if you live in the United States corporation, a dollar bill is no longer money. It's what's called a fiat currency, F-I-A-T, fiat. I highly suggest you look that up. Since 1971, the world was taken off the gold standard, and basically since 1933, we've really been taken off the gold standard. And we originally went from gold-backed money to silver certificates. If you look at an old dollar, if you have a dollar bill from like the 1950s or before that, you'll see it'll say silver certificate, redeemable on demand, which means you could have gone to the bank at that time and gotten that much amount of silver for that particular certificate. Now you see your dollars no longer say silver certificates, they say Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve is basically a private-owned bank, owned by shareholders, which they don't mention who they are. So we basically have to pretty much speculate, although we do understand who some of the people are, like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and other very wealthy families are in charge of the Federal Reserve System, which basically, in a nutshell, without going into big details, loans the United States government this money that we, the people, have to pay back plus interest. Now, since your currency is no longer backed by anything, there's no fiscal responsibility. Now, what does that mean? Well, back in the days when gold was backing the dollar, it meant they had to mine that gold and have that gold available to create a certain amount of dollars, which means if you didn't have the gold, you couldn't create the money. So it basically kept in check how much that you could actually print. Now, of course, it wasn't a 1-to-1 ratio, but it still kept things relatively in check. Since 1971, and they took the world off the gold standard, our country, because the world currency is the U.S. dollar, it's called the petrodollar, P-E-T-R-O dollar. I highly suggest you look that up as well. But since that particular time, there is nothing backing the U.S. dollar. In other words, instead of being responsible and saying, well, I can only make as much currency or money at the time, with how much gold I have, since they took that away from it, now they have nothing backing it up, nothing to prohibit them from printing money to infinity. So that's why you're seeing billions, then trillions of dollars in deficit, because they are basically creating money like a printing press. The only difference is nowadays, instead of even printing the majority of it as physical money or the currency that you have in your wallet, they put numbers in a bank. So you have to be understanding the difference between currency and money, first of all. So that'll give you a general idea. I'm going to give you just a brief information here. There are other videos that I have on my channel, so if you're interested, please watch them, because I dedicate my life trying to give this information out to help awaken the people so they no longer get taken advantage of. Because if you're watching a video like this, obviously you have concerns. Obviously you could see that countries around the world are not working the way the politicians are promising. And it's up to people like myself and others who care enough to share this information to help get you on the right path. Now, we can't travel it for you. We can only show you the path. It's your job to do your due diligence and research. So please recommend that. I highly recommend that. So, when it comes to putting your money in a bank, or currency, because that's what it is. See, even old habits die hard with me. We still are programmed to use that word, money. It's no longer money. When you put your currency in a bank, first of all, there's no more interest anymore. I mean, when I was a kid, and I'm 43 going on 44 in November, you had savings account where it was 5.5% to almost up to 6% interest on the money that you had. Nowadays, you're lucky if you get 0.75%. So there's hardly any interest to even be made these days. But when you leave your currency in a bank, you are actually losing value. It's not that it disappears. So let's just leave the argument. Let's say you had $10,000 in the bank, and you left it there and didn't touch it. And 10 years later, you go and get that currency out of the bank. Now, you'll still have the initial $10,000 that you had, provided they didn't take all the fees out that they're now starting to charge. It's a way to steal your money. They just love to use words like taxes and fees and service charges and things of that nature. But let's just assume they didn't take anything and you have the same amount that you left in, which is $10,000. Well, if you look at the price of inflation, inflation basically is talking about how much you need to buy something. The higher the inflation, the more expensive things are going to be. That's why, for example, in the 70s, you could buy a house. An average house probably cost about $8,000. Well, the average house now probably costs about $200,000. So you see the big difference. A car in the 1970s probably cost about $2,000 to $3,000 at tops. Nowadays, the average car is about $19,000 to $20,000. Gas in the 70s was probably around 45 cents a gallon. Now, it's almost $4 a gallon. So see, the difference is you're spending more of this currency to buy the same things that you need. Now, when they talk about the indexes of how the economy is doing, two of the things they don't factor in are food and fuel. The two major things that the majority of us spend our fiat dollars on. Gas to get yourself to work and to run the machines, electricity, and food, which obviously is self-explanatory. But they try and doctor the numbers, because if you look at a number and you're trusting these politicians to give you the accurate information, you're going to believe what you hear on the TV, because we've been taught to trust these medias. Now, this is the question I will ask any of you out there. Can you name 5 politicians in your lifetime, anywhere from a mayor to a president, and everything in between? Can you name off the bat 5 politicians that you would say were nothing but pure, honorable people filled with integrity that did nothing but good? And other than even thinking of JFK, I would really basically find it difficult for anybody to think of it. And that's out of what? Hundreds of thousands of politicians over the decades, going from like a little mayor to the president. And these are the people that we trust. And we see their incomes are getting higher and higher as ours are getting lower and lower. So people tend to ask myself, now I can't answer for anyone else, but people will ask me, why is it that I try and purchase physical gold and silver? Well, first of all, if you don't research history, you're doomed to repeat it. And one of the things I've researched about money is that the majority of the world, going all the way back to the Roman Empire, is when they started using government-funded monies. It always started out with gold, silver, copper, precious metals, and they used it as a form of money because trading would be the wonderful and ultimate way to be able to do bartering and exchanges with other people. But if you don't have something that somebody else wants, or vice versa, then the trade is going to be very difficult. So that's one of the reasons why they came up with currencies and money. And they figured something that is not easily obtained. In other words, they didn't want something like a tree and a leaf, because you could grab any leaf off of a tree, you can grab any bark off of a tree, and then you'd be able to make as much as you wanted. So they came up with an idea of finding precious metals that you had to find in the earth, you had to process it, you had to create it into a coin, so it made it something that had value because it took man's labor to be able to get those things. After a while, you start running out of the precious metals to back up your money because you expand, your population grows, you might have wars to finance, expansions to finance, and as the landmass that you acquire expands and the people you have to pay, because soldiers don't work for free, spreads everything out. And as the community gets larger and larger, you're going to have more resources needed, more schools, more roads, more health programs. Eventually, you start running out of the resources. So what they all eventually start doing is they end up extracting the physical metals from the coins, because originally that's what countries and nations use. They use coins. And what they started doing, and again, this goes back as far as the Roman Empire, they would start taking out what they would consider, it was the first government coin that was guaranteed to have 80% pure silver in their coins. And over the decades, they started extracting some of the silver from them and filling them with other metals like copper and lead, devaluing those coins. Now, they didn't tell people they did this, but eventually people get wise, because if you're so used to a certain shape, color, weight, or for some reason somebody decides it doesn't feel right or it doesn't make the same resonating noise and they break it open, they basically discovered what they were doing. And that ultimately causes the collapse of a currency. And if you know anything throughout history, this has repeated over and over again. And it always ends up in a failing currency. And they always start over again. So when I get physical gold and silver, and again, I'm speaking just for myself, I can't answer for anyone else. Knowing what happens in history, knowing what always happens in history, because every fiat currency throughout recorded history that has gone from gold and silver, which is money, to a fiat system, which is where they extract the metals and extract the real wealth from it, every single one of them throughout history has failed. So we're either going to be the exception to the rule by doing the same exact thing they've all done throughout history, or we're going to follow the same path. Now, if you're a betting person, you would probably bet on the fact that if we're doing the same thing that every currency and every money has done throughout history, and they ultimately failed, well, chances are we're going to fail as well. That's why you're seeing things getting very expensive. That's why you're seeing all these job losses. That's why you're seeing your money is not buying what it used to buy. It's not that things are getting more valuable. It's the dollars that they print, because it's not backed by anything. You need more of it to make the purchase. They want you to stay poor, because if you're poor, you are easily controlled. That is why there are millions of people on government-assisted programs like food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, because you can control the masses by giving them little bits and pieces of crumbs. They don't want independent free thinkers. They don't want people to acquire wealth and be independent, because then they cannot control you. So that is why you'll see these politicians always trying to give you these little things, which may seem beneficial, but for the little they give you, you'd be amazed at how much they prevent you from ever happening and ever getting. So you probably get from the governments 1% of the potential you could have if you didn't have them giving you those little trinkets to keep you happy and keep you in solitude, keep you in poverty. Because today's currency is all about debt. Money cannot be created unless somebody borrows it. It's like a Ponzi scheme. You have to keep having participants in it to keep it going. When it comes to putting your currency in a bank, as inflation rises, as they print more and more money, which devalues it devalues that currency, the money that you have, or the currency that you have, loses its purchasing power. And as a matter of fact, since the Federal Reserve opened in 1913 till today, we have lost approximately 94% of our purchasing power because of what they are doing. It's basically made to keep very small amounts of people in high amounts of wealth and controlling the masses with poverty and debt. And that's why you most likely to buy products and necessities tend to use credit cards, borrow money, have loans. Now, here's something you need to know about when money is created. Banks can create money out of thin air. For every certain amount that you borrow, they are allowed by law to add up to sometimes even more than that